The snowmelt came the way grief comes back, without asking and all at once. She had been watching it from the kitchen window for 3 mornings, the way the drifts along the fence line softened and pulled away from the posts, leaving dark rings in the frozen ground below. The yard had been white since November. She had learned every variation of that white this winter, the blue-gray of it before dawn, the hard glare of it at noon when it made your eyes water if you weren't careful, the orange it went at dusk when the light came low across the basin, and the mountains turned the color of rust. She had not meant to learn those things. That was not what she had come here for. Her trunk was packed. She had done it the night before, while the house was quiet, folding her 2 dresses and her wool shawl, and the apron that had gone thin at the pocket from a year of use. She had left out the cedar box her mother had pressed into her hands, the morning she left Ohio 3 years ago. Before the marriage, before the mine, before all of it. The box had been sitting on the windowsill above the wash basin since September. She had put it there to make room for the lamp, and then left it, because the morning light hit the wood in a way she found she did not want to give up. She would decide about the box this morning. He was at the table when she came downstairs, his coffee in front of him, untouched and going cold. He had already done the morning feed. His hat was on the peg by the door, where he left it when he came in from the barn, and now he sat with his hands around the cup and his eyes on the table, not looking at anything in particular. He looked up when she came in with the trunk. He looked at the trunk, then at the window where the cedar box still sat in the pale March light. She had been wrong about a great many things this past year. She knew better now what it meant when he looked at a window instead of at you. It meant more than looking at you directly would have. A year ago, he said, I told you what I needed here. She waited. I was wrong about most of it. To understand what those words cost him, you have to go back to the previous March, to a road outside the town of Cutter's Crossing, Montana Territory, and a woman sitting in the back of a freight wagon with a carpet bag on her lap and a folded piece of newspaper in her coat pocket. She had read the ad enough times that she no longer needed to take it out. Housekeeper needed. 2 children, ages 8 and 11. Room and wages. No other arrangements. That last line was what had made her write the letter. She was not looking for other arrangements either. She had tried those. She knew what they cost. Her husband had been 3 years dead, caught in a collapse at the Carmody silver mine, the autumn after their wedding. She had been 26. She had spent the years since keeping house for her husband's aunt in Miles City, a woman of exacting standards and small unkindnesses who had made plain, after the 3rd winter, that the arrangement was no longer convenient. She had one trunk, $40, and no one in particular to write to. The ad on the mercantile board had been the first thing in 3 years that offered her exactly what it said and nothing more. The freight wagon left her at the end of the drive and went on without waiting to see if anyone came. The house was long and low, log-built, with a woodpile running the full length of the eastern wall and a porch that had seen better winters. A dog lay in the barn doorway and watched her with the mild disinterest of an animal that had learned not to get worked up over visitors. He came around from behind the barn with a length of rope in his hands before she had gone halfway up the drive. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at the trunk, then at her, the same flat assessment she would come to know well. Not unkind. Just a man who did not like to be wrong about things and was making sure he had it right before he committed to anything. You answered the ad, he said. I did. He came forward and took the trunk without asking. He was not a man who offered his name first. She learned it later from the surname carved into the gatepost, but she never used it. She had not come here for names. Inside, 2 children sat at the kitchen table with their lessons spread between them. The older, a boy of 11 with his father's same careful eyes, looked up and said nothing. The younger, a girl of 8 with both braids coming loose at the ends, set down her pencil and looked at the woman the way you look at weather, trying to decide what kind it would be. Read, the man said. Fern, say hello. The boy said hello. The girl looked at the woman for another moment and then said, very quietly, is she staying? That depends on what she decides. She looked at the kitchen, the stove with its ash pans set wrong. The shelf above the window with its row of tins gone out of order. The curtain that had lost a ring and hung crooked on one side. A year's worth of a house running without a system. She could see where a system would go. "I'll stay," she said. He told her about the stove. Hold the damper half open the first 5 minutes, or it wouldn't draw. He told her the pump needed priming twice before it caught, sometimes 3 times in cold weather. He told her Sundays were her own, weather permitting, and wages first of the month. Then he looked at her directly and said, "I want to be plain about something." She waited. People assume things when a man posts an ad like that. I need to be clear about what I posted. I need someone who can keep this house and look after these children. He did not look away. Not someone who thinks this is going to turn into something else. That fair? More than fair, she said. I'm not here for something else either. He nodded once, picked up his hat, and said he'd be in from the barn by 6. The door shut behind him. The dog, which had followed them in, put its chin on its paws in front of the stove and closed its eyes. Fern was still watching from her chair. "The stove," the girl said carefully. "You have to knock it on the left side too, before the damper. Papa forgot to say that part." The woman looked at the stove, then at the girl. "Show me." And Fern got down from her chair, in her loose braids and her unlaced boots, and showed her. That was the whole of it. No promise, nothing that would have made a story worth writing down. Only a girl of 8 showing a stranger the knock that made a stove catch, and a woman who understood that this was as close to a welcome as she was going to get, and took it with both hands. The first week taught her the house the way any honest house teaches itself, by what it doesn't offer. The door to the back room dragged on the left side unless you lifted the handle slightly as you pushed. The pump primed on the 3rd pull if you caught the pressure right. Reed ate everything put in front of him, stoically, including things he clearly didn't want, with a persistence that made her think of someone she had known before. Fern would not eat anything boiled. She would not say so. She simply arranged the boiled things on her plate until they had sufficiently cooled and then dealt with them. And she did not thank anyone for accommodating what she had not admitted to. The man ate at the head of the table and said little. On the 4th morning, when the biscuits came out right, he took a 3rd without comment. She understood by then that this was the shape his approval took. She did not need it in any other shape. Reed tested her the way 11-year-old boys test things, methodically, like a problem he had committed to solving. He left a dead mouse in her apron pocket one Tuesday. She found it while reaching for a towel, removed it without expression, and dropped it in the wood bucket for him to deal with. He was watching from the hallway. She looked up and said only, "Next one goes in your boot," and went back to the flower. That was the last of the mice. After that, he tested her with questions instead, harder in some ways, but considerably better. Fern attached herself differently. She appeared at the edge of whatever room the woman was working in, quiet as a thought, and simply stayed. She watched the way someone watches a thing they aren't sure they're allowed to want. 3 weeks in, she came in from the yard with a small brass button she'd found near the fence and held it out on her palm. "I don't know where it's from," she said. The woman turned it over, examined the worn pattern on the face. "I can keep it until you find out," she said. Fern looked at the button, then at the woman. "You keep it," she said. "You're better at keeping things." She said it as a simple fact with no sentiment attached, which was somehow worse than sentiment. The button went into the cedar box. The cold came down in November with a decisiveness that settled the matter of what winter would be. Ranch winters were something separate from town winters. No borrowed warmth from neighboring walls, no general store 2 streets over when supplies ran short. The wind found every gap in the log walls and had to be answered with firewood and caulk and patience, in that order. She did her share without instruction. He noticed, she knew he noticed because of what he didn't say, which was what he never said about things that were going right. When something failed, he said so, flat, clear, like nailing a board. When something worked, he simply went on without the friction that would have been there if it hadn't. Absence of friction was his version of a compliment, and she stopped needing any other kind. December brought frost to the pump casing 3 nights running. She started rising before 4 to prime it with water heated on the stove, pouring slowly, listening for the groan of the metal giving up its cold. He came in from the barn one morning and found her doing it. You were up before 4. It primes faster if you start before the temperature drops again. Pause. You should have said, it's handled. He poured his own coffee and said nothing more. 2 mornings later, she came downstairs to find new pipe lagging wrapped and wired around the pump casing. He had done it in the night before she was up. He did not mention it. She did not thank him. She used the pump with 2 fewer steps each morning and filed the fact of it away under a different heading than all the others. Reed's birthday was the 15th of February. She learned it from the school calendar tacked above his desk, where he had written it himself in small, careful letters. No one mentioned it at breakfast. She made a round cake that afternoon with the last of the white flour. Nothing elaborate, just a pancake with a little sugar worked into the crust. She left it on the table without ceremony. He came in from helping his father in the barn and stopped when he saw it. He looked at it, then at her, then back at the cake, the way a person looks at something they weren't expecting and aren't sure they're allowed to want. He ate 2 pieces and went to his room without saying thank you, which she understood was its own kind of thanks from a boy of 11 who was working hard at not needing things. 3 days later, the man rode into Cutter's Crossing and back, 20 miles round in the cold, and came home after dark with a small tin of cocoa powder he set on the shelf above the stove without a word. He had seen the empty flour tin on the shelf after the cake. This was what he did with that knowledge. He replaced what had been spent without letting anyone make a point of it, quietly, before you'd finished missing it. She used the cocoa the following week when Fern had a bad morning. She did not explain to anyone why she made hot cocoa on a Tuesday in February. She simply made it, and Fern drank it with both hands around the cup and went to school 10 minutes late with her chin up, and that was that. January had already brought the fever. Fern's came up fast, whole and sudden, the way things come in children, and it came up high. She sat with the girl 2 nights, then a third, cloth and cooling water, and the kind of watching that tells you what a fever is doing in the small hours when it's either breaking or it isn't. She had done this before, in a different house, in a different life. She knew what she was looking for. The man appeared in the doorway on the 2nd night. He did not come in. He stood at the threshold with his arms at his sides, and she saw in the lines of his face something she recognized from her own. The helplessness of caring about something you cannot fix with the tools you have. She did not tell him the fever would break. She didn't know that, and she didn't say things she didn't know. She's fighting it, she said. That counts. He went out. In the morning, a split log sat at the bedroom door, and the hallway lamp had been filled with oil while she slept in the chair. Fever broke on the 4th morning. Fern woke clear-eyed and called the woman something she had apparently been saying in her sleep. Not ma'am, not anything formal, something smaller and more particular, with no official edges to it. The woman did not repeat it. She tucked the blanket tighter and felt the heat receding from the girl's forehead and let the words sit in the room and do what it was going to do. He was in the doorway when she turned around. He had heard it. She could tell by where he was looking. At the floor just past the threshold, the specific way a person looks at something that has caught them sideways and they are working out how to stand up straight again. He said nothing. He went to the stove and put wood in without being asked, the firebox door closing with its familiar iron click. After that, nobody counted plates anymore. There had always been 3. Now there were 4, and that was simply what there were, same as the hook by the door or the window that let in the afternoon light. Reed began leaving things on the ledge above her wash basin in February. A piece of pale quartz, flat and smooth. A bluebird feather still bright despite the cold. A length of curved driftwood that looked, if you held it at the right angle, like a horse mid-stride. He never said they were for her. She never asked. But the ledge filled up through February the way a ledger fills. One entry after another, small and unremarked, and adding to something that neither of them named. The man from the timber company came the 2nd week of February, in a coat too thin for the weather. with a ledger under his arm and a voice that tried for gentleness and mostly achieved a careful distance, the distance of a man delivering news he did not make but would not undo either. She was in the kitchen. She stayed there. She was not part of this conversation, but she heard every word of it. Afterward, the man stood at the front window for a long time without moving. She brought coffee without being asked and set it on the sill beside his hand and went back to the kitchen without a word. He stood there and drank it. At supper that night, he ate everything on his plate and said nothing. And the children, who understood more than either adult gave them credit for, excused themselves early and went to bed without prompting. That night, after the house went still, she sat at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low. She heard his step on the floor above. Once, twice, the rhythm of a man doing arithmetic that will not come out right no matter how many times he tries it. She did not go up. She was not part of his arithmetic, but she sat there until the pacing stopped, so the ceiling wasn't empty, while he worked through it. The cold began to relent in the second week of March. She could feel it in the way the morning air came through the gap at the window frame, still cold but no longer absolute about it. The snowpack on the roof softened and ran off the eaves in long, clear streams that turned the porch steps slick. She spread ash from the stove bucket on the steps each morning to keep them safe. And on the Thursday of that week, she came downstairs to find someone had already done it before she woke. She stood on the porch with the empty bucket and looked at the steps and then at the barn and said nothing. Her year was up at the end of the month. She had not planned past it. A year ago, she could see only as far as a roof and a wage and a household that needed running. She had run it. She had packed her trunk the night of the 28th, folded the dresses, set the apron on top, closed the latch. She had stood at the windowsill for a long time looking at the cedar box in the lamplight, thinking about Ohio, about the mine, about all the arrangements she had made in her life that had eventually stopped being convenient for someone. She left the box on the windowsill. She carried the trunk downstairs in the morning. He was at the table. His coffee was cold. His hat was on the peg. He looked at the trunk, and then he looked at the window where the cedar box caught the pale March light coming off the snowmelt. "Fern's boots have been by your bedroom door since October," he said. She waited. She's never left her boots anywhere in her life. Her mother couldn't get her to, not once. He turned the coffee cup once in his hands without lifting it. "Reed fixed the porch step last week. The soft one near the rail, the one I kept meaning to get to. I saw him do it. He did it because he saw it needed doing and thought someone ought to." He looked at the cup. "That boy watches for what needs doing and then does it. Gets that from his mother." A pause. "He started to watch you the same way." He set the cup down on the table. "He doesn't watch people that way unless he thinks they're worth the attention." Outside the barn, the dog had found a patch of bare mud where the snow had pulled back from the fence and was lying in it with his chin down at ease for the first time since November. The smoke from the chimney went straight up in the still morning. The mountains to the west had dropped their winter gray, and in the timberline above the basin, something closer to green had started to show through, faint and new, the first color she had seen up there since October. "A year ago," he said, "I told you what I needed here. I was right about the house, right about the children." He was looking at the window. "I was wrong about the rest of it, about thinking that was all a man could need from one house and one life." She looked at the cedar box. It was sitting in exactly the light she had first noticed in September. That particular morning angle that wouldn't come back again until the following year. "You left it," he said. "I hadn't decided." Decide now. Not a question, not soft about it. Just him, asking plainly for something he had not asked anyone for in a long time, looking at her the way he looked at a problem he had finally stopped pretending wasn't there. She crossed the kitchen to the window. She picked up the cedar box. She turned it in her hands, felt the familiar grain of the wood, the chipped corner from the wagon ride out of Miles City, that she had never repaired because there had never been enough quiet to do it in. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back on the ledge. She turned to face the room. The table with his cold coffee. The hooks by the door where the children's coats hung in order of size. The stove that only drew right if you knocked it on the left side first. The door that opened without dragging if you lifted the handle. The pump that caught on the third pull if you had the rhythm. The lamp with the new chimney he had replaced in November and never said a word about, though she had been using the cracked one since September, and he had clearly noticed. She looked at him. "I'm not going," she said. He nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled, and he did not need to say more about it. He stood and lifted his hat from the peg and said he had the east fence to walk before the ground went too soft, and went out. The door fit right in its frame if you closed it firmly. She had learned that in the very first week. She went to the stove and started the coffee fresh, because his had gone cold, and because this was a house she knew now. Its sounds and its silences, its soft spots and its solid places, the things it asked for and the things it simply gave. There was work in it. The morning was only just beginning.